You actually did mention something there, though, did spark my interest. Jim Harbaugh, him talking about a return to the NFL. I know we kind of had a little bit of a disagreement in the Slumpbuster group chat about a potential landing spot for him. So let's get into it. Jim Harbaugh has been linked with the Las Vegas Raiders. Not an official thing, just kind of some speculation more than anything.
Jim Harbaugh's agent is doing his work.
Exactly. Kind of in the same way that his name came up for the Detroit Lions head coaching job last year. But this year, he has a little bit more steam behind it. He has a little bit more gravitas behind that Harbaugh brand. He has a little bit more to bring to the table, given that he did just bring Michigan to its first ever college football playoff and its first chance at really getting a national title in 20, 30 years at this point, even though, of course, Georgia decided to just smack them in the semifinals there. But still, nonetheless, I think this would be a great landing spot, and I think this would be a great hiring for the Las Vegas Raiders. But you disagree.
I disagree on both fronts here. And the SparkNotes version of this is basically this, is that from the Jim Harbaugh side, let's think about what Jim Harbaugh would be giving up to leave this job. Jim Harbaugh feels like he's in this place right now where he can have one of these Chris Peterson, Mike Gundy, Mark D'Antonio type of jobs for the next decade. Jim Harbaugh's in his 50s now. As a head coach, he probably has 10, 15 years left as a head coach. Maybe he decides to retire early like a Bob Stoops or Chris Peterson at Washington, who retired at 57. But Jim Harbaugh is kind of in this place where Michigan is not one of the 10 to 12 premier programs in college football, but they're in this next group where they're willing to invest in the football program to build a stable winning program. It's not going to be nationally great. It's not going to be one of the 10 to 12 like programs that I would argue those jobs are better than an NFL head coaching job. Alabama, with the power and resources you can invest. Georgia, the University of Florida on a good year. The University of Texas, when they turn things around, they have more money to invest in those programs. You could throw Ohio State in the mix. Some people would argue Clemson. Clemson's probably in there, Oklahoma, USC, et cetera, like jobs that you view as well as NFL jobs. Michigan is not one of those jobs, but it's still a pretty good job to have. And if you're going to leave that behind, of you can be 10 to 15 years the coach at Michigan, transition into a role where you're this beloved figure at the university and still have a say in decision making with the program, it's hard to turn that down. It's not the national level of success. We don't think of Mark D'Antonio as one of the all-time great coaches in college football, but it's hard to turn that down. So would he turn that down for the Raiders? Because Jim Harbaugh undoubtedly has had a lot of success based on some really, really lucky situations. When Jim Harbaugh got to Stanford, Stanford didn't have success for 30 years in football. And the reason they had the success they did is because one of the greatest quarterbacks of the last 10 years happened to decide to go to Stanford and play for Jim Harbaugh, that being, of course, Andrew Luck. And they had 3 really great years with Andrew Luck. And then Jim Harbaugh went to the NFL and inherited a really, really great situation with the San Francisco 49ers and built it in such a way that they could make 3 conference championships in 4 years with a foundation of guys like Patrick Willis and Frank Gore and Alex Smith, which then transitioned into Colin Kaepernick and being that stable foundation. And you could throw Joe Staley in the mix and other guys on the defense.
So let me ask, are you saying that you see Jim more as a trailer than a tractor?
Oh, it's a great question, because we've seen the body of work at Michigan, which is Jim Harbaugh is undoubtedly a very good coach, but Jim Harbaugh also benefits from the circumstances that he inherits. Michigan making 1 playoff appearance in 6 years, about what we thought Michigan would be. And in fact, Michigan probably wasn't going to make it this year in the playoffs, if not for 1 victory over Ohio State. And so Michigan kind of exists in this like tier 3 of college football programs. And that's a pretty good job to have if you have total job security there.
So the next thing I have to ask, so you think that's the peak at Michigan?
I think that this is as good as it's going to get at Michigan, because Michigan is just not one of those programs anymore. We've seen it in the past whether it be, you want to go all the way back to the 60s and 70s with Bo Schembechler, and this is a totally different game that we're watching now, or you want to go back to the 90s where they happened to get Charles Woodson and they happen to still have that national brand, and Midwestern football still had a really strong recruiting base, but now there's national recruiting, so it changes the math a little bit. I think this is probably as good as it gets for Michigan, considering Michigan hadn't won a Big Ten championship since 2004 prior to this run. So I think 9 to 10 wins consistently is about as good as it's going to get at Michigan. I think of Michigan in the same group like Michigan State, like Auburn, Oklahoma State. I think of them as programs like that. And that's not a bad place to be. If you're going to leave that behind, because if I were in that position, I would have a really hard time leaving that behind. Like Mike Gundy's turned down multiple head coaching offers at the University of Tennessee, the University of Florida, Ole Miss, because he has this good thing going at Oklahoma State. Is Oklahoma State ever going to win a championship? No, Oklahoma State's never going to win a championship, but they're going to be pretty consistently in it every single year, make a bowl game every single year, win 8-9 games every single year. To leave that behind, I would have to leave for the perfect job, and nothing screams dysfunction more than the Las Vegas Raiders, other than maybe the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Detroit Lions. But after that, even the Detroit Lions, though, by the way, the Lions have made 3 playoff appearances in the last 20 years, and the Raiders have 1. Even the Raiders scream dysfunction more than the Detroit Lions. And I don't know if I would want to go to that organization. I don't think the marriage works for either side. I don't think the marriage works for the Raiders or Jim Harbaugh.
Okay. Here's why I think that it works for Jim. The incentive's there. You said the incentive to stay at Michigan because you could be comfortable. You could stay at a job for 10 to 20 years. You could just coast by on your reputation, get it 10 wins. And that sounds fine to the general population. But I don't think that's Jim Harbaugh, man. I don't think that's what Jim Harbaugh is all about. Jim Harbaugh wants to be in that championship conversation. Jim Harbaugh wants to be among the elite head coaches. I think that Jim Harbaugh, while he loves what he did at Michigan this season, he ultimately wants more. And if it proves untenable for him to get more at Michigan, then I think he is going to pursue a job that intrigues him, a job that interests him. And the Raiders, I understand the reason to doubt the Raiders organizationally. Obviously, your lifetime, my lifetime, they've been bad for a majority of that. I got a little bit of the end of the Rich Gannon, John Gruden, Callahan as the head coach, but that was about the end of the Raiders being a successful franchise for me. Yeah, you had the Jack Del Rio year, 2016, Derek Carr, pseudo MVP until he broke his leg there. But
Khalil Mack won Defensive Player of the Year that year.
That's been the peak of their success. But I think of Jim more as a tractor than a trailer. I look at those Niners teams. You say he landed a perfect situation. If you looked at the Niners teams going into that, you would not say it felt like a perfect situation. They were mediocre for a large part of it. And I saw a lot of coaches in that tenure do less with more, but Jim was able to do more with less, was able to get the most out of those talents, was able to get Vernon Davis on the same page, was able to get Navarro Bowman and Patrick Willis, Joe Staley just being consistent. And the biggest example of Jim Harbaugh turning around that team was Alex Smith. Alex Smith in his rookie contract, his first 5 years in San Francisco, he was probably a bottom third NFL quarterback. And that's being nice. You look at that 1 year, that quick turnaround, 2011, you took a team that I believe had 6 wins the year before. It's hard for me to remember, and turned them into a 13-3 juggernaut. 13-3. That's a no laughing stock record in the NFL. It's hard to just lose 3 games in the NFL. And in fact, if you look at how that team started off, I believe through the first 13 games of the season, multiple games of the season, they didn't even allow a rushing touchdown. He just brought a mentality to that team that I think has been echoed through every place he's ended up, whether it be at Stanford, whether it's been with San Francisco, or whether it's been with Michigan. There's been some sort of edge that he's brought to that team. And I think he could bring that to a place that has had its share of dysfunction like the Raiders. Now, as far as for the Raiders' incentive to do it, you just want to implement some level of stability into this franchise. And you want to have a coach that you think could potentially be around there for multiple years. You don't want to just have flavor of the month hire, and then 2 years later, you're having to replace him. Now, I think they want a guy that's had a proven track record in the NFL. Jim's had a proven track record in the NFL. He's done it in college. At this point, I'm just ready to declare him. He's just an overall good coach. He's a probably tier 2 coach as far as college, pros, everything. And I think that the Raiders could really use someone like that. Now, the question is, do they give him organizational control? Now, that is a thing in which I disagree with any organization doing for any coach, because I have never seen an example where it's truly worked other than Bill Belichick, but Bill Belichick is just built different. So for Harbaugh's
and even
case,
people criticize Belichick, the GM. Even
Belichick, the GM, his wide receiver luck, I think is palpable every year that we just look and you have N'Keal Harry just out there, or gosh, I can't even name half of the wide receivers that he's pumped in there.
They traded a second-round pick for Mohamed Sanu. 7 games.
That is just one blind spot in Bill's game. It just will never be corrected. But for Jim, I think as long as you're bringing in Jim, the head coach, and Jim not the personnel guy. Now, the question for the Raiders is he a good fit with Mike Mayock? Are you getting rid of Mayock? What do you do there? I think like him and Mayock actually could work together. Mayock, you scout the players, and you look at Mayock, he's actually done a decent job of getting players in there. Like a guy like Max Crosby coming out and being one of the NFL leaders in sacks. You know, Josh Jacobs didn't think much of it at the time. Josh Jacobs, when he's on the field, is actually a pretty solid little running back. Probably the only big swings and misses you really talk about are like Farrell, you know, just picking him out.
Oh, there's a lot of them for the Raiders, because you can obviously throw Damon Arnett in the mix and Henry Ruggs.
Yes, different reasons there as far as that, but they were contributing on the field is the thing. They were good draft picks up until their personal life issues came into play, which could you say, were those guys more Gruden guys? Were they more Mayock guys? I think Mayock has done good jobs in the later rounds, picking up guys that have contributed to the Raiders team. That defense has made a turnaround in the last years. The fact, we're going to get into it. They're competing for a playoff spot this year. This year, when they have lost their head coach, their first round draft pick from a year ago, just saw a legend of their franchise pass away. And the Raiders are still hanging around here in week 18. If you told me they just had stability at the head coaching position, this is a franchise in a new stadium, a new environment. They left the Oakland Raiders behind. They're the Las Vegas Raiders. They could cement their legacy in Las Vegas for a while. And I think it starts with making a big boy hire, getting some guy with some big boy pants. I'm talking about those khakis. Get those khaki pants on your sideline and you'll win some games, Las Vegas.
I mean, isn't that kind of what they just did before? Like Mark Davis said, we need an identity as a franchise, and Jack Del Rio was a fine coach, but they wanted the sexy $100 million coach.
But again, unforeseen circumstances. I don't know what's going to happen in Jim Harbaugh's emails 10 years from now. He's probably just going to be talking about chicken being a nervous animal. And that's
it's not like the Gruden experiment was going great before all of the emails leaked. They hadn't made the playoffs very much. They had draft bust after draft bust come through the organization. And I'm still amazed. I say this all the time. I'm amazed Derek Carr outlasted John Gruden in Las Vegas, because they feel like they're still in quarterback purgatory of he's a fine quarterback, but he plays to the level of the roster that you put around him.
Pound for pound, who's the better head coach between John Gruden and Jim Harbaugh?
Jim Harbaugh, certainly, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that Jim Harbaugh is going to be successful, though, with the Raiders. And I think a big part of this, too, is Jim Harbaugh is only going to be as good as the players that you put around him. And the Raiders are going to have a really hard time doing that. Like you said, they have a solid foundation. I'm not going to say a strong foundation. I'm not going to say a great foundation. They have a foundation at this point. Yes, they have Max Crosby. Yes, they still have Yannick Ngakoue. Yes, they still have Darren Waller, hopefully, as long as he can come back from injury. And yes, they still have Derek Carr. And yes, Hunter Renfrow somehow has 1,400 receiving yards this year. All of that is there. But I could point to most teams and say there's a foundation. It puts the Raiders in a position where they're very clearly like a middle of the road team in the AFC. And I don't know if you want to sign up for splashy coaching hire when you're not in a position to actually build that success now.
I'll say it again. The Niners were a middle of the road team in the NFC before they hired Jim Harbaugh.
But with the 49ers, I think then you could still point to really talented players on the team, like Patrick Willis. That's a borderline Hall of Fame.
In hindsight, who knows? who knows if some of these players on the Raiders roster might have some unlocked potential that we're not talking about because they're getting overshadowed by all the disaster that's happened to them this season and all the turmoil of the Raiders franchise as a whole for the last 2 decades.
That is a fair analysis there. I don't know if I don't think that it's replicable. Maybe the Raiders want to try it, but I feel like you would be setting yourself up for another 3 and out type of situation.
Well, here's the second part of this. We literally talked about this last week, the other 4 names that the Raiders were talking about. You didn't care for a Leslie Frazier. You don't want Todd Bowles. You don't want some of the other, let's see, in their own coaching staff, Gus Bradley or Rich Vespaccio. Those 4 names, you said it yourself last week. No excitement there from that. Who else are the Raiders hiring that is a better hire?
Oh, I could give you a few down the road that I'm thinking of. Well, one of them would be Kellen Moore for the Cowboys. I think that's one where it's like a low risk, high upside potential hire. Nathaniel Hackett for the Packers as an offensive coordinator. I think that's an interesting type of hire. I don't think Doug Peterson would be that interested in the Las Vegas job, but Doug Peterson reflects kind of something interesting.
Doug Peterson reminds me a lot of Jim Harbaugh. You're getting a lot of similar type qualities, and he was at the mountaintop. He did win a Super Bowl. That would be a impressive hire for them. For this organization, coming off of what they're just dealing with right now, that would be impressive hire.
Yeah, I think that Peterson would be something. I'll throw Eric Bieniemy in the mix there too, because we kind of gloss him over every year. I don't know what the reasoning is behind it at this point, but we kind of gloss over him every year. So those are some names that I'd throw out that at least would get me more interested. And part of that is just because I haven't seen it before. Maybe it's something that we just don't know and we're just missing out on some parts here. But the Vegas glamour of Jim Harbaugh as a hire. Again, by the way, I just found out 58-year-old Jim Harbaugh, 58-year-old Jim Harbaugh as your head coach feels like it would be quite stressful for Jim, but it also reflects Jim trying to maximize his window while he still has a chance, because as soon as Michigan has another 8-4 season or 9-3 season, we're not talking about Jim Harbaugh for one of these jobs. And I think that's probably part of it too, is that I feel like I know what Jim Harbaugh is at this point. It is stability, but I think whoever the Raiders hire is going to fail because they're not going to make the playoffs in the next 3 years. But at the same time, I don't know if Jim Harbaugh would want to sign up for that when maybe you could wait it out for a better situation. And if not, Michigan's a pretty good place to land. I should have probably clarified that on the front end. No matter who the Raiders hire, I don't think it's going to work out because the Raiders can't get enough talent to make the playoffs consistently in the AFC.
I will push back on you. They hired Jim Harbaugh. They're making the playoffs next year. Bet.
Well, that's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts in between, but I feel very
we will
confident
answer the ifs,
that.
ands, and buts here in the next 2 weeks when it happens. Am I right? Or am I
Yes,
right?
and I will take those odds absolutely, because I already know the Chiefs are winning the AFC West. So now you can filter in the playoff spots after that, wherever you want to go. And I'll take the Chargers. I like the Chargers. I know they're playing a 1-game toss-up with the Raiders this weekend for a playoff spot, but love me some Justin Herbert.
Here's what I'll say too. I think that, again, I mentioned the name Alex Smith earlier. I think if there's someone that I think that maybe not maximize being the right word, but be able to get the best out of Derek Carr from a playmaking perspective, similar to what we saw early in the season with John Gruden actually turning around Derek Carr's career, I think it would be Jim Harbaugh. I think a guy who's played quarterback in the NFL would be a good guy to have in Derek Carr's corner. If he loved Gruden, I guarantee Derek Carr, Jim Harbaugh would get along too. And I think that would be a good starting point for the Raiders as they progress